Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I want to start by thanking my colleague, Senator Collins of Maine, for her work in crafting this legislation and the language of this bill, and more generally in her matters of leadership formerly on the Homeland Security Committee, and certainly for the time that I have been on the Intelligence Committee. Her contributions have certainly not gone unnoticed, and she has been a pleasure to work with in trying to find reasonable places where we can make a material difference in the kind of mass shootings that we have seen. I should start by just speaking a little bit to the recent tragedy in Florida. And as the father of two young boys, I can't begin to imagine the nightmare that families are living through as they mourn the loss of their children in the wake of yet another horrific mass shooting. Frankly, no parent should have to live in fear that their child would not come home from school. It's pretty unthinkable. You know, just last week, one of my own sons went through an active shooter training at his school. And sadly, that is now the new norm in schools all across our country. 91 Americans are killed each day by gun violence, and we simply cannot accept the status quo as the new normal, when there are real and concrete steps that we can take to reduce gun violence while respecting constitutional rights. And once again, Americans are looking to Congress to finally enact common sense reforms to our gun laws, to protect our school kids, to protect our children, to protect our communities. And like so many Americans, I have been deeply moved by the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School students and young people all across this country who have spoken out after losing classmates, after losing friends, to demand that we as lawmakers take action to prevent future tragedies. It is no secret to my constituents or even my colleagues here that I am a passionate outdoorsman, a hunter, and owner of firearms. And I strongly believe that law-abiding Americans have a right to own guns for sport and for self-defense. I am teaching my own sons how to safely, how to responsibly use those firearms. But the vast majority of Americans, including gun owners like myself, know that Congress must take action to close some of the loopholes and reform our laws to keep those deadly weapons out of the hands of those who would turn them against our communities. And today I'm quite proud to join my colleagues from both sides of the aisle, Senator Collins, Senator Heitkamp, Senator Flake, and others, to introduce one of those measures that should have broad bipartisan support. This is a poster child for the kind of policy that ought to get across the finish line, even in these deeply divided and partisan times. Our bipartisan legislation, the Terrace Firearms Prevention Act, would deny firearm sales to individuals who appear on the Department of Justice's no-fly or selectee list. These are the narrowest of databases, the kind of lists that you have to work pretty hard to land on, and for good reason. Our legislation includes due process procedures for individuals to appeal their placement on those lists. But it seems pretty straightforward to most of my constituents that if the government and law enforcement has determined that an individual is so dangerous as to land on the terrorist watch list and is too dangerous to fly on a commercial airplane, that person should not be able to walk into a gun shop and purchase a gun. But unless we pass this legislation, this glaring loophole will continue to allow individuals identified as terror suspects to buy firearms. It's time for those members of Congress who oppose common sense reforms like this to finally step up and tell us what they are doing to protect the public. It's time for all of us to listen to the student leaders across this country who are rejecting the unacceptable status quo of our nation's gun violence epidemic. Those of us in the Senate who know firearms well have a special duty to lead these efforts, to get the details right on any legislation to reshape our nation's gun laws. Mr. President, inaction simply won't cut it anymore. We all need to listen to these students, to these parents, to these teachers, to our own children, who are calling on us to be part of the solution here. New Mexicans can count on me, despite the odds, to continue fighting for real solutions, to keep our children safe, to reduce gun violence, and to keep our communities safe. That's what our communities and our constituents deserve. Thank you, Mr. President.